Who are Metallica? I've never heard of them.
Yeah, I'll put something on for you. Back to the old school.
Do 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 do.
Boom.
Die, die, die. Help! Please help me.
Doon, 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 doon.
Thank you, good night!
What the fuck were they doing there? God almighty.
They're pimply-faced teenagers on stage performing these amazing kind of musical feats.
You know that little thrash band of 3 years ago? They could be huge. They've got that potential to really appeal to a very, very big audience.
Holy crap, this band could be not just big in the UK and not just big in Europe, but this band could potentially be a worldwide phenomenon.
One thing that's characterised Metallica all the way through their career is their sincerity, you know, and up to a certain point maybe, but certainly, you know, for the first 15 years, their sincerity was everything, which is why they became the biggest metal band in the world, because that, you know, more people could relate to Metallica than to anyone else, you know, and there's a reason for that, you know.
They were so young, and when you look at the picture on the back of Kill 'Em All, you've never seen so many spots between four people. I mean, they were just kids. But they were appealing to kids of that age. I'm a spotty little herb, but I could be doing that. That's fantastic.
Metallica. Yeah.
Metallica are the biggest heavy metal band in the world. Over the course of their 25-year career, they sold over 90 million albums, won Grammy Awards, and toured the world dozens of times. They've survived death, alcohol addiction, on-stage accidents, lineup changes, and endless accusations of selling out to become a genuine musical phenomenon. The Metallica of today is a far different beast to the one which first stepped on stage in Los Angeles back in March 1982.
They took a bunch of different bands and basically threw them in a blender and sped it up. So for me, it was like a lot of stuff they did was almost familiar.
Just the over-the-top craziness. I mean, they were playing the kind of music nobody really had done too much before. I mean, there's Motorhead and, you know, Venom and stuff like that.
But it was sped up with, you know, attitude and everything else with it, you know. No one else was doing that at the time.
Lars Ulrich somehow managed to get himself onto a metal compilation album, even though he couldn't play drums and didn't even have a band. So he advertised to get a band together, and of course they had to go answer, and he put the band together, and that's how they basically formed the band.
I think they put an ad out that they were looking for a guitar player, and I think Dave responded to the ad. And you know, and Dave saw that they were influenced by new wave of British heavy metal, so I believe that's how they got together.
Metallica only showed real promise after they were joined by two talented musicians, guitarist Dave Mustaine and bassist Cliff Burton.
They were really drunk, you know, doing those shows, but you could hear the improvement when Cliff had joined.
just with the amazing technique he had on the bass. You know, they just only played a couple of gigs together with Cliff and Dave in the band at the same time.
It was pretty much off the hook. I remember watching this band, and it was like, it was pretty amazing actually. It was pretty raw, but it was a trip because you had Dave Mustaine and James, and like they both kind of like were frontmen. Like one, you know, like for one song, James would announce that song or whatever, and then for another song, you know, Dave would, you know, talk.
Alright, Foxers! How many of you have a middle finger? This is a classic, I'm sure you've all heard.
And you kind of saw that kind of separation there, you know, but it kind of worked. And James was like off the hook. He reminded me of like Reagan from the Exorcist. He was just like, wow, you know, just real crazy. But it was something really cool, you know, and I knew they were going to do something from that first show.
They'd seen Cliff play in a band called Trauma, who were based here in the Bay Area.
Cliff was a very nice guy. I'd met him when he was in a band called Trauma before that. And I knew somebody, a friend of mine knew the guitar player from Trauma, so we would go see them and stuff, and Cliff was amazing. He's just, you looked at him, like everybody else in the band, I mean, they were good at what they did, I guess, but they weren't, you know, moving like he did, and it's just, he was the focal point of that whole band.
Everybody said, this band is pretty good, but you gotta see this bass player. And, you know, everybody's just talking about this bass player. It's just unbelievable. So naturally, you know, it was a must to see. All of a sudden, he was in Metallica.
Trauma came and played a show down in LA where the guys in Metallica were based at the time. And they were really blown away by how great Cliff was, and they got a hold of Cliff and like, dude, we want you to join our band, because they weren't happy with Ron. And Cliff said, well, I'd be in to join you guys, but I ain't gonna move to LA, so you're gonna have to come up here if you want me to join your band. So they kicked Ron out of the band and moved up here to San Francisco, where they'd already gigged a few times and were very successful and really built a following up here, and they loved it here anyway, so it was just a natural for them to move here, and that's how they got together with Cliff.
San Francisco shows were just off the hook. Crazy drunken bashes. Well, it's kind of funny. The first time I took pictures of them, there was no camera policy, and I ended up getting my film taken away by the security. They tried to expose the film, and I ended up getting it back. Luckily, I rewound it back into the camera, and that ended up being the shot that Cliff used on the album, which is ironic, so it almost didn't exist. Back then, you were allowed to take pictures of all the concerts. You didn't have to have a photo pass, you know. It wasn't big business like it is now, you know. First 3 songs and all that baloney. So I just thought it was really cool to document, you know, the shows, and it was really neat to get some really cool concert shots in there.
Lock up your wife and children.
they gained popularity pretty fast. You know, I'd say within a year's time, a lot of people knew about them that never knew about them before, and their popularity got bigger and bigger after that.
Cliff, he would like headbang, and the rest of the band would be going like this fast. He would be going like half speed, and I could just get some incredible shots of him with his hair sticking straight up in the air. Yeah, you couldn't get a bad photo of him. He was just an incredible bass player all the way around. But yeah, I think Cliff, he was just, I don't know, I've never seen anybody like him to this day. I mean, he used all the crazy wah-wah pedals, effects and stuff. It was just incredible. Just the conviction they had on stage. James, at first he wasn't that much of a front man. He wasn't very sure of himself, but through the years he's really gotten really good at that. Now it's like he's a natural up there.
In early 1983, Metallica were invited to New York by store owner John Zazula, who funded the recording of their debut album and released it on his own Megaforce label after failing to interest any record labels in the band. But before this happened, Dave Mustaine was fired.
Yeah, well, Dave had been a problem for a long time with his alcoholism and such, basically when they were they had basically decided they wanted to get rid of him when they were traveling to New York to get ready to record the album, they were like I think listening to tapes on the way down there while Dave was sleeping in the back, and they were very interested in Kirk Hammett, who played with a band called Exodus, who Metallica had played with a few times.
So when they got there, it was like, you know, Johnny Z's like, hey, you know, great, let's sign a record contract. And they're like, you know, we got a problem. So, you know, they called Kirk, and he was the only guy they called. And I remember when he got that call, he was like, you know, Exodus was doing really well. And he was like, and he was asking, you know, he asked me, asked, you know, his friends and stuff, you know, what do you think I should do? And I said, well, man, they're signing a record deal, dude, and they're really good. So, you know, you might want to think about doing that.
So it was like when they first got there to New York, it's like they made the phone call to Kirk, and they wanted Kirk to fly out there, and then they had to tell Dave, hey dude, you're out of the band. Like they did, like I think like the day after, the first day they were there, they all get around Dave and wake him up and tell him he's out of the band. And which was of course very upsetting to Dave. They put him on a Greyhound bus all the way back to L.A. from New York to L.A. So he had a couple of days on the road to think about it, and you know they had to get him out of there because Kirk was flying in, and if Kirk got in there, it would have been a big fight. So they had to get Dave out of there as soon as they could.
Musically, it was really a nice fit, but I think personality-wise, something had to give. But what they brought to the table together for Metallica was really unique, because there's a lot of riffs that Dave had brought to Metallica that they used even later on after he left.
Dave did everything 110. He was on 10 all the time, you know. Whatever Dave wanted, Dave got, basically, you know. So when he left the band, they lost a little something, but they gained stability as far as I'm concerned. You know, Kirk's a good guitar player too, you know. So I think that's what they needed, you know. Dave running that show would have probably ended up dragging them straight down the toilet.
Dave was difficult. He was enough to deal with when he was sober. When that guy got drunk, forget about it.
After recruiting Exodus guitarist Kirk Hammett to replace Dave Mustaine, they recorded a blistering debut album, Kill 'Em All, so named in response to the record company executives who had failed to show any interest.
The album Kill 'Em All with Kirk's guitar playing sounds so much better than the demos, in my opinion. I mean, when I listen to the demos, I mean, I don't even know how they got signed because they just sound so awful compared to what was on the album, which was very polished and had all this speed and aggressiveness. I mean, my first turn onto them was when I heard Kill 'Em All. That album changed my life. I mean, I used to think the heaviest thing in metal was like Iron Maiden, pre-Sabbath, and when I heard Kill 'Em All, everything that I thought was heavy was considered obsolete. I mean, this made Iron Maiden sound like the Bee Gees.
They hooked up with Johnny Z, with Megaforce Records, and he was probably one of the strongest of the independents at the time, and he pushed them like crazy.
The only thing that frustrates me is the majors did get involved with heavy metal music. It certainly isn't the music that Marsha and I developed back in '83, which was really cool. It was sort of a psychedelic, aggressive kind of a heavy metal music, speed metal, thrash, whatever you want to call it. But Metallica and Anthrax was certainly, and still are today, ahead of their time. Marsha and I pretty much know what the Megaforce sound is. In fact, we have the bands that deliver the Megaforce sound.
That we've been known for, that heavy metal Megaforce sound.
That crunch.
At that time, it was just exploding. They got their demo out early, so a lot of people from all the underground had already heard about them. They probably put out 2,000 demos, worldwide, through the tape trading. It's, it's a nice little network, and I think by doing that groundwork and then just being pushed and having the records, on the shelves, when they did, it just really took off. And they, and then of course they got on good tours, early on, and they were out there. You got to get as much exposure as you can,
It just exploded in the underground. They toured extensively across the states, and and got Kill 'Em All was doing like 65,000 copies worldwide, and on a tiny little label, that was really, really good.
Prior to Kill 'Em All, metal was heavy metal. It was kind of this, like a rock. It was this thing that lived in the ground, and you banged your head to it, and it was a bit beery and a bit kind of staid even. It wasn't overly exciting. With Kill 'Em All, you have this kind of infusion of energy, which for a want of a better word, you might describe as being punk. So it wasn't heavy metal, it was metal. It was much sharper, you could cut yourself on it, and it was a bit volatile. The band themselves were volatile. Hetfield was volatile. And it's easy now to read this into it as you look back, because you see the things that happened to Metallica and the things that Metallica became. But that kind of energy and that kind of determination is evident in the music.
Come on, everybody! Give it! Oh yeah! Alright!
Well, by comparison to what they did since, Kill 'Em All sounds pretty, it's unpolished, it isn't the fully finished Metallica beast. But yeah, when it did come out, it did shake up the metal community a little bit. It wasn't out of what they were used to. It was the usual kind of tales of war and death and the usual extremity you'd expect from that scene. But there was a certain amount of depth to it, and it did show where Metallica were going to be going in future.
I'd seen them live a couple of times, in clubs in London. It was see 2 or 3 numbers, go to the bar. Once you'd seen 2 or 3 numbers, you'd kind of seen it all. At least that was my view.
Action out there, man! Got yourself some motherfucking whiplash! 1, 2, 1, 2, 3,
They were kids. They were really young, really pimply, really long-haired. They thought the longer the song, the louder the song, the more kick-ass it would be. But these were very early days. Their crowd was very easily pleased. Thrash metal was a brand new phenomenon in the same way that punk rock was when the Sex Pistols were doing clubs and colleges. You were kind of absolutely madly into it, or it didn't really mean a great deal. were a huge hit with fanzines. These days it would have been the internet and websites supporting them. Back then it was fanzines, small metal magazines. In Britain, Kerrang! Magazine was the first national magazine anywhere in the world to put them on the front cover or support them. They really were taken enormously seriously by young fans, young skate kids, thrash metal freaks, but by the critics themselves, the same people that would have been writing about Thin Lizzy or Journey or Iron Maiden in those days. They weren't on the radar whatsoever, and it hurt them a great deal. Lars Ulrich, the drummer, very much the leader of the group and very much a music press devotee, was keenly aware of the fact that Metallica weren't written about in the right places, weren't taken seriously in the right places. You know, the very first album that they recorded was originally called Metal Up Your Ass and featured a fist coming out of a toilet with a sword in it, and they thought that was hilarious. But of course, hilarious as it may have been to them, it wasn't going to cut any ice with Rolling Stone, NME, Village Voice, The Times, The Guardian.
Their manager at the time, Johnny Z, sent me a tape which was a picture of a very unpleasant sword coming out of a toilet called Metal Up Your Ass. And I listened to it and I thought, whoa, crap, this is fantastic. And at that time, I mean, it seems weird to say it now, but you'd never heard of speed or thrash or whatever. And so it was a completely new phenomenon. And I played it to a few people and they actually thought I was having a laugh.
It wasn't immediately obvious to everyone that either Metallica or thrash metal were forces to be genuine forces to be reckoned with, whether they had any staying power. I think some people actually considered Metallica to be a bit of a joke, but certainly on reflection it didn't take long for people to realise the quality of that album, that there were really some very strong songs there, as well as a very, very energetic sound, which really hadn't, I don't think anybody had quite heard anything like that before.
I can remember we did an initial pressing of 3,000 for the whole of Europe, and we didn't sell half of them in the first month. And I'm thinking, oh, holy crap, I've really stuffed this one.
At the time that Kill 'Em All came out, a lot of heavy metal was just about Dungeons and Dragons, and it was quite boring, it was quite cliched. It was becoming a bit embarrassing for a bit more of the intelligent side of heavy metal, so I think what Metallica did was sort of dust the cobwebs off heavy metal, and that album was kind of a blueprint of where they would go.
You have to really put it into context and perspective. Yes, we'd had Iron Maiden come through. Yes, we'd had the new wave of British heavy metal. Yes, we'd had the birth of a new form of extreme metal, thanks to bands such as Venom. But Metallica really took everything into a new arena. And the reason is simple: songs. Every track stands out. That's what made it a landmark debut. Songs, crucial songs that people remembered, and as soon as they heard the title, a medley and a melody came into the mind, as well as a heavy-duty riff.
Kill 'Em All was a collision of styles that had never really happened before. It was the old school metal, but it was also it also had the energy of punk and the speed of punk rock and hardcore, and it also had the kind of that nasty, scuzzy, you know, playing in sweaty shitholes kind of vibe to them, and Metallica had that in spades. You know, they were obviously, you know, swilling booze like maniacs, and they were all about, you know, taking speed and going berserk, and you could hear that on the record. You know, it was a dirty rock and roll record, but it was, you know, thrash metal is the phrase that absolutely defines what it was all about.
It was a turning point in the metal genre because it was so fast and it was so raw, and a lot of people found that a little bit hard to take, actually. Some people thought it wasn't polished enough. Some people thought it wasn't refined enough. On the other hand, a lot of people got really into it because it was just so fast and so heavy.
It just tapped all the touchstones that defined the genre. You know, just like the downstroke chugging guitars, you know, the finger shredding leads, you know, like the shouted vocals. I mean, just like James Hetfield was no operatic vocalist. I mean, he was like a punk singer, you know, singing those kinds of things. The only difference was they weren't 3-chord melodies. There was something far more complex and aggressive. And so I think in a way, it wasn't as groundbreaking as I think a lot of people want to believe it was. It simply crystallized the sound, and it gave people a launching off point. You know, once they heard that, they knew what they should try to emulate if they wanted to be a thrash band.
If you look at the cover, you can see basically a bunch of spotty Herberts on the back, you know, with bad mullets and you know, cut off denim jackets and you know, they were young kids playing really loud metal, and they were drinking a lot and doing drugs and going mental, and the lyrics reflect that. You know, they weren't great philosophers, and you're not going to get, you know, sort of any kind of massive amounts of profundity in their lyrics, and nor should you. You know, I mean, Whiplash, when the chorus goes, you know, thrashing like a maniac, you know, that was what that song was about. So you didn't need to have any kind of poetry to go with that.
Basically what they were doing was just knocking out a load of metal cliches. James himself admitted this later on, that the lyrics on Kill 'Em All were just tosh. In Whiplash, there's the line, bang your head against the stage like you never did before. Make it ring, make it bleed, make it really sore. Which tells you something about the level of songwriting in 1982.
It's just so primitive and gritty that it immediately connects with an audience. You can bang your head to it, and you know that at some point James Hetfield's going to shout Whiplash, and then the solo kicks in and everybody goes berserk and starts throwing their pints around, you know.
It had a crazy guitar solo in that Kirk Hammett just unleashed from nowhere. It doesn't come in at a normal point in a song, it just hits you when you're not quite expecting such guitar work to kick in, and it throws you, and because of that you just want to let rip yourself and do some air guitar work to it.
Sometimes with Slayer, they tended to lose the melody in a lot of dense heaviness. Metallica never lost sight of the fact that what made a song happen was it stayed in people's minds, and Whiplash is a part of that. They do go for the blurring solos, they do go for hyperspeed, but beyond all that, there was a discipline and a melody.
You can only go so fast before you become just like a blur or like a drill or something. So and to actually still have any really serious musical quality, you can't really go that much faster than Whiplash. I would be very surprised if Metallica went through a whole tour and didn't play the likes of the Four Horsemen, Whiplash and Seek and Destroy. I mean, those are songs that will get, you know, 50,000 people at a festival going mad because everybody knows them. And even though the album didn't, you know, obviously the album sold really steadily over the years, and everybody knows those tracks now, and they're heavy metal classics.
Stand
Well, Seek and Destroy is kind of like an anthemic heavy metal song, basically. You know, you can bang your fist in the air, you can headbang to it if you have hair. It's a bit of a no-brainer as a song, really, but what it does is it's a rebel-rousing anthem, really, for a tortured youth almost. You know, you can bang your head, you can shake your fist and throw the devil horns at it.
The actual song itself is intriguing because it's about someone who goes out looking for fights, and people often mistake it for some sort of militia track, a military action and attitude. It's not. It's really about people who go out looking for fights after they've got slightly drunk or gone into other things.
Funnily enough, it was one of the songs that saw him evolve a bit as a frontman. He was quite unconfident before that, but when he had a bit that he could sing along with and get the audience to get involved with, it did him a lot of good as a performer, I think.
Come on, man! So take it back! So take it! Seek and destroy! Alright then, you guys know Mars? Yes sir! Ow!
Above all else, I mean, it's a very, very catchy song, and I think it kind of proves that Metallica always had a really good ear for sort of catchy riffs and melodies right from the beginning. So although they were very extreme, they sounded very extreme in 1983, there were still some sort of classic rock moves on the album. And Seek and Destroy is just a really simple sort of chugging riff.
Metallica always did killer choruses. You know, there's numerous songs on Kill 'Em All that have got huge choruses and anthemic choruses, stuff that, you know, they're still playing those songs live now because they work so well in a live setting. You know, Seek and Destroy being the obvious one, and Hit the Lights, I suppose, and Whiplash as well. You know, they're all things that people can bellow along after a few beers. You know, which were maybe some of the later thrash bands, the bands that followed after them. Although there's always, you know, stuff you can shout along to. They weren't, you know. They weren't melodically strong, a lot of those bands. It was more about the speed and the aggression, whereas with Metallica, the song was always paramount, even when they were playing at 100 miles an hour.
Okay, one more time. Seek and destroy. Yeah, yeah.
The other thing was, if you listen to that record, yes, it's got the fast and furious riffing, but you immediately hear a little bit of light and shade. There's a bit of tone there. They weren't just going straight for broke, sprinting all the way through. They knew you had to have a balance. The highs are only high if there are lows to emphasize how good those highs really are. But the fact is, it defined the genre because it was head and shoulders above the genre, not because they were the first.
I don't think Kill 'Em All is their best album, but it's, you know, it's got a spirit to it that people really identify with, and they did come fully formed. Their sound, the Metallica sound, was there from day one. So it is a really, really strong record, and there aren't many better debuts or more influential debuts than that.
Kill 'Em All was fast and raw, but Metallica, and in particular James and Cliff, were rapidly developing as songwriters, and it was clear that their music wouldn't confine itself to the thrash metal style for long. After tours with Raven and Venom, they returned to Lars Ulrich's home country of Denmark to record their next album, Ride the Lightning.
Ride the Lightning was a completely different situation for them. Johnny Z, by that time, had kind of run out of money. So we stepped in and said, all right, well, we'll pay to record it. And we set them up in Denmark in this little studio with Flemming Rasmussen, I think his name is. But a few weeks went by and I hadn't heard anything, so on the phone I spoke to Lars. And he kept saying, no, everything's great, man, everything's great. We're on course, it's fantastic. And then another couple of weeks went by and I'm thinking, well, they must be, getting on for finish now. So I said, have you got any roughs you can send me over? Not exactly. And I thought, I don't like the sound of this. So I got on a plane to Denmark. And the first thing I discovered was that there was an elephant beer dispenser in the reception. So my suspicions were aroused immediately. And when I went in, they were still getting a drum sound. And this was 6 weeks into it. We ended up sort of kicking some ass and sort of having some conversations, etc. And then they got on with it. And so by the time Ride the Lightning was finished, it was actually a stunning record. I mean, a stunning record. And it was kind of a turning point for them and a benchmark for a lot of other bands.
Given the fact that we're talking about a year, literally, between the first Metallica album, Kill 'Em All, in 1983, and the second one, Ride the Lightning, in 84, it's astonishing what a leap they've made.
Maiden and Priest were making great albums around then, but Metallica suddenly sounded like the best metal band in the world when Ride the Lightning came out. That was the difference. And their contemporaries, which, Megadeth and Slayer and Anthrax, were just getting started at that point. And Metallica were kind of going, bye.
They had grown into their reputation, and straight away, as with all leaders of a genre, they superseded it. They outgrew it.
Ride the Lightning was a massive step forward from Kill 'Em All, and what's most remarkable about that is that they recorded it only a year later. So the growth in their music in that time was astonishing. It was a real seismic leap. The difference, I think, was that Kirk Hammett had now been in the band long enough to exert his own influence on the band, which was a considerable one, and they had had many successful tours across the USA. But really, they just came together and they began to develop their music. It became more epic, it became more structured.
They took it to another level on this set on Ride the Lightning. The lyrics were a little better, the production was a little better, the songs were a bit more aggressive than on the first one. I just think from beginning to end, it's a great record.
If one bears in mind the recording budgets which they were working to, this was before they had big, huge management. It was before they had a major label representation. So it would have been done cheaply, on the fly. It is a really tight and impressive record. Some of the songs, many of the songs, still hold up today. Creeping Death being one, For Whom the Bell Tolls being another, Trapped Under Ice, Call of Cthulhu. It is a fabulously good record.
I think the thing is with Ride the Lightning, when you first hear it, it is a stunning kind of movement forward, and listening to it in retrospect since and hearing all they've done since, it does kind of deaden that shock value. But with things like For Whom the Bell Tolls as well, this massive sound, the kind of Ennio Morricone soundscapes with Ernest Hemingway, it's just everything about it is huge, it's massive, and that's the thing. But then again, you had it set against the subtleties of Call of Cthulhu, and that's where Metallica really stand out from the crowd. It's just the crescendo sounds so much more powerful because of the respites you get with the quiet passages, which you don't get with a lot of metal bands, and that's why I guess Ride the Lightning was another watershed moment for metal. That's the one where you really start to see that there is a lot more to this band than just another thrash band.
While Ride the Lightning was a masterpiece, some fans were concerned by the direction Metallica took with the acoustic ballad Fade to Black. For the first time, the band were faced with accusations of selling out to a more commercial direction.
I think Fade to Black shows where Metallica are going. At the time, it shows where they could go. You know, it shows that there's a different kind of direction that they could do. Even though it kind of encapsulates all that they're very, very good at, because of the melodic touch, it shows that there is they can speak to a lot more people than there would be. They're not going to be trapped in a scene. This thing can go very, very mainstream.
Metallica always had the thrash element in the 80s, but they added different light and shade, different diversity, different styles. They did an instrumental called Cthulhu on Ride the Lightning, but most important, they did Fade to Black. And I remember just before Ride the Lightning came out, they just finished the album, interviewing James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich for the very first time in London, talking about the album, which I hadn't heard at the time, and James saying, we've done a ballad. And then he looked to the ceiling and said, I don't know how our fans are going to take to us doing a ballad. It's not really what they want from us, is it? But we've done a ballad, and we're very proud of it. And Lars actually was a lot more bullish, saying, you know what, this is Metallica. If they're Metallica fans, will understand what it's all about. It's still intense, it's still heavy, it's just not super fast. So immediately, you had this Metallica do a ballad shot? What is this? Have they gone folk?
It's hard to imagine Metallica recording a song called, like Fade to Black on Kill 'Em All. At that point, I think if anyone had suggested, let's do a song that has really prominent acoustic guitars at the beginning, and it's a kind of meditation on suicide and, you know, misery and all the rest of it, that couldn't have happened on the first album because they were still going, yeah, we're a fucking metal band, come on! And on Ride the Lightning, they were still doing that, but they'd grown up just enough to be able to get away with doing something like that.
Back then, in 84, extreme metal bands weren't writing anything remotely that would fall into the sort of rock power ballad category. And although it isn't really what you'd call a ballad, it certainly has a little quiet bit, which was people weren't really expecting. Quite a lot of quiet.
I think they did. I don't think even now any other band can do ballads the way Metallica do them. I mean, a lot of bands do ballads and it just sounds totally cheesy, but Metallica do it, it still sounds heavy, you know what I mean, and emotional in a good way.
And the thing is, because it's still quite raw as well, at that time before James Hetfield's actually, like, his vocals get, not that his vocals are bad, his vocals are good on it, but before he's obviously come into like big time producers and they've made him, his vocals sound so much better and he's got vocal lessons and whatever or anything like that, and it's excellent, you know what I mean, it keeps it that raw vein sounding really good.
When they play Fade to Black, when you hear it on the record, when you see them play it live, they're not crying into their beers over a girl that dumped them. I mean, it's that kind of sort of, you know, fist held to the chest kind of manly sadness, you know, just when you sort of cough and light a cigarette and just get on with your day sort of thing, you know. It's a very kind of macho kind of sadness, you know, because I mean it's still very powerful, you know, but the thing is James Hetfield's never bleeding in it, you know. I mean, you don't hear it and just feel like he's just going to like break up into pieces or whatever. He's basically just saying that, well, you know, life is shit sometimes, you know, and that's about as far as it goes.
And the way Kirk Hammett played guitar was one of the first times you ever heard what he could do as a technician. There's a richness to this tone. He doesn't just play off the rhythm and the riff, he's playing off the chorus as well. And I think as a result, it's far more tuneful and far more enveloping and far smoother in a way than anything they had done. So this was a template very much for what they were to do even more successfully in subsequent years.
They kind of allowed themselves a freedom with their style very early on, which enabled them to do something like Fade to Black without anyone going, well, that's a bit sissy. You know, no one's thought that at the time. Everyone just sat there with their jaw on the floor going, fuck me, that's one of the best things I've ever heard in my life. They could bring an atmosphere and bring a feeling to metal songs that other bands wouldn't have been able to grasp what they were doing. And I don't think it was something they sat around and thought about. It's an instinctive, intuitive thing that Metallica had. You know, they were great songwriters and great musicians, but they just had an instinctive feel for what made metal work. And in the same way that Judas Priest and Iron Maiden also had those same gifts, Metallica just took it to another level because they were just heavier, you know, and yet they could play the most delicate lilting bit of acoustic guitar in Fade to Black, or do a really slow drop down bit where there's hardly anything happening in Creeping Death and the crowd's going die, die, you know, do something as simple as that, and yet it sends shivers down your spine, whereas other bands would just blast away at 100 miles an hour, and you know, as brilliant as that can be, it's you know, you can't argue with class really, and Metallica had lots of class.
Fucking death, man. What'd you say? Everyone, die, 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 die. Ain't good enough, man.
Well, it's always been a live favourite, Creeping Death. Well, it's got that really good audience participation bit. We all know it. Die by my hand, all of that. So you get 50,000 Gumbies all giving it that all the time. It's a little bit Nuremberg rally, but it's pretty damn good fun.
Creeping Death combined a lot of classic metal elements. It had this amazing lyrical subject, which was the biblical plagues in Egypt, which was just fantastic. And then it had this riff in it, which was highly catchy. It wasn't quite thrash, but it certainly wasn't mainstream metal. If anything, it had more in common with Iron Maiden than other metal bands of the day, like Sabbath and whoever.
Come on, then!
It actually took an Exodus song, Die by the Sword. Now Exodus were the band Kirk Hammett had been in subsequent, prior to joining up with Metallica. And he took that song with him. And they changed a little bit of it around, but it was based on that track that Metallica developed, Creeping Death. So in those two terms, it was a song inspired by the Bible and based on a song by one of their closest rivals in the Bay Area at the time.
It's not just you banging it out. It's got a bit more feel to it. And I mean, what a riff! I mean, God Almighty, that is one hell of a riff. And I think that was a song that really, even the people that were slightly sceptical after Kill 'Em All, when people heard Creeping Death, I think, you know, as the single, they were quite shocked because they sort of thought, Christ, I mean, you know, it's a really great song. It flattened just about everything around at that time with the power. So, yeah, it's a great track.
song breathe a lot more, you know what I mean? Like traditional thrash had just been 100 mile an hour and in your face, and that's great. But I think they maybe took it to a different step, a different view on thrash with that, you know. And just to basically that's it. I mean, they gave the song space to breathe rather than just being straight down your throat.
It is. It's just like you've got the stabs at the beginning, and then it goes down to it goes back down to the riff, and James Hetfield's playing the riff on his own, and then everybody knows it's about to come in. You know what I mean? And the big tom fill comes in, and it's straight in, and the crowd goes mad. It's a good song for the crowd to go mad.
It's definitely one of the best songs on Ride the Lightning, and it has this incredible solo in it, which Kirk, to this day, refers to as one of his favourites. It has this amazing fretboard tapping section at the end, and then it ends in this incredible sort of pyrotechnic explosion, which makes it one of the high points of the record easily.
You know it, motherfucker!
I think all guitar solos to a certain extent can sound very dated. It's a question of time and the times we're living in now. Grunge kind of killed the guitar solo, and now when you listen to heavy metal from the 80s, a lot of the guitar solos do almost sound out of place. Certainly live, Kirk Hammett was terrible for, and still is terrible for, noodling around and just playing too much and getting too involved in his own guitar prowess, and it's just like, oh, turn off, go away, you know, time for a pint, you know. I don't need to hear a 20-minute extended guitar solo. Kirk Hammett is terrible for doing that, always has been, probably always will, but then he is a guitarist.
I think he was very much from the sort of Van Halen school of playing, where it's just like, I mean, it was just sort of just high on the neck, you know, and just like, I'm going to do a whittly bit here, I'm going to do a whittly bit here, and I'm going to squeeze this in. And it's just like, you know, whoa, look at me doing this, you know. It's just like, there's a sort of lyricism that he began to achieve, I think, later on, you know. But yeah, then it was like, it was really bold and new and obviously incomprehensible to the general record buying public. They'd never heard anything like that.
Creeping Death is a live favourite, always has been, always will be. For Whom the Bell Tolls has to be. You can't go and see Metallica and not hear that song. That song is tremendous.
I'll tell you what's cool about For Whom the Bell Tolls is it's got a big ominous sounding tolling bell at the beginning of it. Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath, Hell's Bells by AC/DC, For Whom the Bell Tolls by Metallica. There you go. That's why it's one of the coolest metal songs of all time. You stick a big bell going bong at the beginning of a metal song, it sounds fucking cool.
It was based on the Ernest Hemingway story, which is very much a love story about things that don't work out right. And apparently it was introduced into the band by Cliff Burton. Cliff thought it might be a great idea to write a song around that particular story. And because it's an epic story, Metallica constructed an epic poem. It's a tone poem in many respects. And I don't think it's overestimating what it does. It's a great metal piece, but it's a tone poem with lots of different things going on.
As a song, it's quite basic, it's quite repetitive, but it kind of works on that level that it is quite a basic song, repetitive, and like any hit single, I guess, it becomes lodged in your head for some reason or other, and it's almost the simplicity of it combined with the heaviness of it for what it is that works.
It was all in E, the bottom tone that Metallica always used. And it pointed directly at the sort of stripped down songwriting they'd employ later on for the Black Album and after that. And that's one reason why it's such a live anthem. It's simple, everybody knows it. It's a short song, it's easy to digest. It's one of the epic songs on Ride the Lightning for sure.
Yeah, I don't know. It is a bit short, actually. In fairness, it's one of those songs that you kind of think they could have dragged that out, because by the time they actually get to like the second verse or the second chorus, it's about 4 minutes has passed, and then there's kind of a solo, and then it goes into that fade out ending with the bell going off again. But it's just, I don't think to say that there's something imperfect about a track from Ride the Lightning. Just if I say that, I'm going to feel like I'm talking bollocks, really, because it's off Ride the Lightning. There's nothing wrong with Ride the Lightning, for fuck's sake.
What has made Ride the Lightning so popular with Metallica fans is the overall, the whole, which is greater than the sum of the parts. It's a very well constructed album that to this day you put on and you listen to it and you think, Kill 'Em All, the first album, was very primitive and raw. The production really doesn't stand out anymore. The songs come through. Ride the Lightning still sounds, if not quite state of the art, not that far off.
In that crucial time between sort of Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets, Metallica were seen as being a rapidly rising cult metal band. They were the band that everyone was talking about, the press, the media, the fans. They just hadn't quite broken through to the level where they were headlining their own tours, but it seemed inevitable.
Ride the Lightning had initially come out on Megaforce, but after 3 months it had been picked up by Elektra, and really they put their weight behind it. And consequently, by the end of the year, it sold 500,000 copies, so they were quite big. In the States, they were doing great guns. And then they came over here and played Donington in '84. And this was the occasion when it's kind of known that there were loads and loads of pig parts thrown on stage at Metallica. And most people kind of think of it, somebody threw a pig's head on stage. But since speaking, I spoke to James about it, and he said that by the end of the show, they had enough pig parts on stage that they could have essentially put together a complete animal, because so much of this pork had been thrown at them. I don't know, it's a sign of appreciation, I guess.
Take that with you!
By 1986, Metallica were riding a wave of critical and commercial popularity. A new wave of American thrash metal bands had risen up in their wake.
I think they put thrash metal and Bay Area in general on the map. Before that, Bay Area was always, before that known for what Grateful Dead and Hayden Ashbury, the hippies, and that was the first. Metallica put it on the map as as something other than that. It's like the Bay Area riffing, the Bay Area metal, to where everybody started talking about it. Every record company wanted to sign a Bay Area band. They don't care what they sound like as long as they're from Bay Area and they got the Bay Area riffing or whatever. So in a way, it's like the success always kind of kills, because you top out and then it dies out. Every band was signed, it was like a stock market crash, it's where everybody got in, and then there's nobody else left to do anything, and it got so oversaturated, boring, nothing was being created, and there was something brewing up there in Seattle, and that was the new thing, you know. So, yeah, and the record companies, you know, how they switch where they can make a buck. So.
Metallica's finest hour for many fans was Master of Puppets, their heaviest, most complex, and best produced album yet.
What they've already done with the first two albums, which is pretty well put a very underground form of music onto the edge of the mainstream. They go right onto the mainstream with this one. This is one that turns on like masses of people onto rock music, you know.
People either really love Metallica or thought they were too commercial now.
They're all over mainstream media. This is big, just proper big records.
This year, Metallica reached the top 30 with their album Master of Puppets, and Anthrax, Slayer, and Megadeth each released records on a major label for the first time.
We're sort of like one step, we're like furthest out in like left field pretty much from the middle of any of the sort of bigger heavy metal bands today. You know, sort of as unsafe as you can get. and we get away with it.
Well, even just before, actually, you know, it was a few months earlier, it was August of '85, actually, Metallica played a Day on the Green, where they were in between, they played with Rat, Y&T, the Scorpions.
And Yngwie Malmsteen, Rat, and Y&T, a bunch of poser bands. And Metallica was second on the bill. But it was interesting because in order to get one of the photo passes that they had, I had to do their dishes. They actually had me do their dishes. So they had me do their dishes, I had to take out the garbage, do a couple other chores around the house. But it was a great show. I got really, really drunk. And I was so excited. It was like the biggest show I'd never been backstage at a huge festival like that. I got some great shots on there. That's all the best outdoor ones I got. But yeah, that was so much fun. I mean, I can't even describe, and that was probably that was 20 years ago.
That was Metallica's first big step, I think, into the mainstream, especially out here in America. You know, they were exposed to a total mainstream crowd. And then Master of Puppets came out, and almost instantly they were put on tour with Ozzy Osbourne. And that's where things come in. Everybody was jumping on the bandwagon. Everybody was walking around wearing a Master of Puppets shirt and thinking it was their first album.
For me, it's the most creative of their attempts. It's just awesome. There's a lot of cliff in that record, and just the textures of the rhythms. It's just phenomenal. It's an awesome sounding record, and I just love the songs. There's just great songs on that record.
Elektra loved the album, and we were doing some other business with Elektra at the time with bands like Rogue Mail and all sorts of things. So we had a whole load of deals going on with them at the time, and they said, "Well, look, I'll tell you what. You know, you paid for the last one. We'll pay for the next one and give you the European rights for free." Oh, okay. So we got Master of Puppets for free. And Master of Puppets was the one that kicked it big time.
They delivered the best album of their career at the time when they needed to. They needed to make a brilliant record that didn't alienate all the fans that were going to put their records into the top 5. You know, because they were the world's biggest cult band when that album was released, when Master of Puppets was released, and by the end of that touring cycle, they were just one of the biggest metal bands in the world.
It redefined thrash again, and it raised the bar for thrash again. And it came out in the same year as Rain in Blood by Slayer, and both those albums made everyone else look like a bunch of twats. It's just absolutely made a mockery of everyone else's efforts, because like, this is what metal in the mid-80s is supposed to be about, and everyone else was kind of left going, yeah, okay, what are we supposed to do now? We're not going to be able to top that.
All these amazing songs would have been nothing if there hadn't been a really, really killer production. And Flemming Rasmussen, who once again produced the album, in Sweet Silence in Copenhagen. Did a great job.
Fantastic job. And I don't think he's ever really got the credibility that he deserves for the sound. And I mean, he was working with a bunch of guys who had never done anything, and he brought that together brilliantly.
Fleming was a heavy metal fan. Fleming loved Metallica. Fleming wore the same t-shirt, had the same hair, would have had his head flailing back and forth by the bass bin at their concerts. He was like the Uber fan who totally got it. So Fleming, ultimately, it wasn't that he was the most skilled producer in the world. He was the one that had the empathy. He was the one that understood precisely what an opportunity this was for them.
The success of Master of Puppets and the previous album, Ride the Lightning, that Fleming also worked on, was really down to the band. I think Fleming Rasmussen did a fantastic job of capturing them. But what you're hearing on Master of Puppets is total Metallica. It hasn't been influenced by the producer. He hasn't put his two penneth in, if you like. It is Metallica. At that time, they were firing on all cylinders. They were getting on great, so Fleming didn't really have to do much apart from record what was going on to the best of his ability.
A producer like Bob Rock would have done exactly what he did do 5 years later, which is say, this 12-minute song would be way better if we cut out that tedious bit in the middle and made it 5 minutes. Would be way better if we kept the beat all the way through, Lars, as opposed to going off and doing endless paradiddles and trying to show how amazingly competent you are. Just keep a damn beat. I mean, that was half the battle for Bob Rock. And I think more than anything, they had more money to spend. So they could spend longer on the tracks, they could use more machines, more time. They themselves and Fleming pushed themselves as far as they could go. None of them had ever been in that situation where they'd had that opportunity before. And although Lars was very good at pretending it was just another day in the crazy world of Metallica, it was insanely important that this went well.
One of the things that Lars said later on when they recorded Justice for All was that the Puppets album sounded as if it was coming about 2 meters away from behind the speakers, which is a result of the mixing rather than the actual recording. But he was right, there's a lot of space on the album, there's lots of room to breathe. Have a look at the song Orion, which breaks down at least twice into a smaller solo section. There's tons and tons of air that you can hear. It's a really atmospheric album, actually.
In the same way that Ride the Lightning blew Kill 'Em All away, Master of Puppets blew Ride the Lightning away, and it blew everyone else away with it. And the things that they did on that album were incredibly mature is probably the wrong word, because there were still a bunch of crazy metalheads at that point, but the evolution that they were undergoing at that point was startling. You know, it was hair-raising to watch this band go from playing Whiplash and singing songs about drinking beer to doing 8-minute epics like the title track, which is just phenomenal.
Depending on when you hear Master Puppets, whether it's from the beginning, or a third in, 2/3 in, whatever, you could be forgiven for thinking that there were different songs, because there's just so many changes that are going on. And it's almost like a memory game when you see it live, because it's just like you want to be one of the ones who knows exactly when they stop, exactly when to throw the horns, exactly when to just kind of shout some lyric or whatever, because it is extremely complex. I mean, just like it must have been a beast to play the first few times they tried, because it's just like, how do you remember all that?
The song Master of Puppets has a riff which sounds a little bit more complex than it is. It has a chord change from E to F sharp as well, which sort of elevates the tension. There's a sort of stop-start section in the chorus where James is shouting, "Master, Master." Master! The vocal line duplicates the guitar line. So it sounds like a complex tune, but actually when you listen to it a few hundred times and break it down to its basic elements, it's just a classic bit of metal songwriting, no more than that.
Master of Puppets was certainly a complex track. It was a complex album, and the band were tight. They were on fire. They were having a real buzz about them. They had a real buzz about them, and rightly so.
It's one of those albums that will never die. You know, if you're a metal fan and Master of Puppets isn't in your top 10 albums of all time, then you are a twat.
Master! Master! Master!
By the time they recorded Master of Puppets, they had heavyweight management in New York, they had a big record deal behind them, and those people very much approached me as one of the key writers in those days that should be covering this band. I was flown out to the studio where they were recording it in Denmark, and I was one of those kind of first wave of so-called serious critics to be very much encouraged to write about the group and take them seriously at last. They were extraordinarily nervous of what the so-called heavyweight journalist would make of it all. The only one that wasn't like that was Cliff. You know, the only one that absolutely didn't give a shit, or if he did, was very good at hiding it, was Cliff. The others were like cats on a hot tin roof. I mean, they were tiptoeing around, they were worried that it wouldn't go well. They were very, very nervous. It was very, very important to them that this album went over big with people that weren't just Metallica fans.
With the exception of magazines such as Kerrang, who will write about them anyway, people aren't writing about Metallica. The NME aren't writing about Metallica. Rolling Stone aren't writing about Metallica. None of these magazines are writing about them, yet here they are. They're on the road with Ozzy Osbourne in the US and basically attracting such a response from the audience that it is really a co-headline tour. In the UK, they were headlining places such as the Hammersmith Odeon, and they are becoming the band to see, and then people are writing about them. So it's a house and a success that's built on the strongest of foundations because it came from the bottom up, not from the top down.
I think, you know, the albums that one always looks back on more fondly are the ones that take a bit of time to reveal themselves to you. And I think there was one level of taking it and going, well, for what it is, this is really, really good. This isn't my regular round-the-clock listening, but for what it is, this is really as good as it gets. But as time passed, and they worked that album for a very long time, you know, over a year they were touring the world with that, you started to understand, actually, blimey, you know, there might be more going on here than I realised. But some albums have a real consistency to them. They have a real identity, musically, vibe-wise. And they had it on that album like they'd never had it before or have ever had it since. There was something, an essence.
While Master of Puppets isn't really the greatest metal album ever made, it's certainly in the top 10, if only for its influence and the way that it kind of pushed the envelope of what metal could be and what people expected from metal. It's just the influence that it's had, it's just the way it's made metal bigger than the metal that it's, you know, when they went into the actual making of the album, metal was smaller than what it was at the end of that album. It introduced the world to the Metallica that we now all know and love. and that's why every home should have one.
Ah!